Hey, good to see you. Thanks for coming. This is another episode of Wireframe brought to you by Design Systems House. I'm your host, Donnie D'Amato, and today we're going to be talking about the startup Whirlwind. And to do that today, I have a very special guest. I'd like to introduce you folks to Frank Stallone. Frank, thanks for joining us on the show here. I appreciate you coming up on here. And fun fact, Frank and I have known each other on the internet for a long time. This is the first time we've actually spoken in real life, which,
That's right.
is just life sometimes. People have been busy, obviously, we get things done through chat sometimes, but I'm really happy to have him on the show. Frank, tell everybody who you are, what you're doing.
First of all, Donnie, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me. It was an honor to chat with you about all sorts of things, design and front-end development-wise throughout the years. And yeah, we've been doing this for many years, you and I. So as you said, Frank Stallone, born and raised here in New Jersey, which is even more ironic because we're very close to each other. And I go to New York City all the time. And it is destined that we will meet, but this is the first time we have chatted. Yes. Long story short for me, origin stories is like I've been into computers my whole life and was just playing on the web as young kids do. And that turned into a job. So I did IT, then I did web design, I did web development. And like the thread through my entire career was, there was a couple of threads, but one thread was like, how do I systematize what I'm doing? And I always used to jokingly say that I'm going to like automate myself out of a job, right? So coming up with like a kitchen sink for backend engineers to be able to build front ends with just copying and pasting code turned into doing the first visual design language at ADP, the enterprise I used to work at. And then sort of just working in design systems and building product and stuff throughout the years. So that's kind of me in a nutshell.
Yeah. Yeah, it sounds, similar to mine as well. Just the building aspect behind it and just tinkering and learning about this stuff. I think this is, hugely valuable to the stuff that we do. Another anecdote here is that Frank, again, as a person that we've connected with a lot, if you didn't know, you should know that he was one of the reviewers for the Misan Mode book. So he has the review in the back over here of the book. It's also on the website if you want to read his thoughts on the book. And we're going to talk a little bit about what more of his thoughts on the book here on the show. So let's just start with that real quick. Before we start with that, buy the book, of course. Yes, go ahead and buy that book. You got to make sure I plug the stuff over here, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Selfless plug.
Yeah, of course. So Frank, tell me, what was your initial feedback about the? Obviously this is over here, but expand more on the feedback that you had on the book. And maybe even because one of the reasons why I reached out to Frank was because he was interested in the initial concept. Yep. He was actually trying to implement it. So talk a little bit more about that, please.
Yeah, I have been following your sort of thoughts on this whole construct of Misan Mode and how you think about breaking down the different problems that we've seen throughout the years with regards to solving for different layers of tokens, for instance. And I've done all that before, and I've gotten really complex component level, very specific tokens and had to deal with the fallout of this is too much and too dense and just not something that is tenable is the word that I would put.
Yeah.
So the concepts that you had sort of put together, even before the book, where it felt like the right abstraction, right? It felt like the right level of detail. And although I think some of the feedback I had given you was that, you had gone really deep, like you went well beyond concept into practicality. And I loved that. I was like, we could actually abstract this in different ways though, right? You know what I mean? Like it wasn't like this is the one way or the highway. And I think that's kind of been my career, is like just taking different pieces of what I felt was the best of different work and sort of pulling it together.
Yeah. No, I like what you said about, the understanding how deep that was, and thank you for the compliments there in terms of the thoughtfulness of it. I've had a lot of feedback about the structure of the tokens that are in that book or just in Misan Mode in general, about different ways of slicing it, right? Like
Mhm.
one of the things that someone has said, it might have even been you, about um, how, well, if you think about all the tokens that are in there, isn't everything just a surface? And the answer is, yeah, it can. Everything could be a surface, right? You have actions and controls. Yeah, they all could be surfaces. But the thing that ends up helping out in some cases in those things is just to slice it up a little farther, because what ends up happening is you end up, potentially over indexing on too many modes. Because if everything's a
Right.
surface, then you have too many modes. You have modes for actions, you have modes for controls. So slicing that up a little bit into the, everything's being a surface, then into not everything's a surface, they're all different categories, helps a little bit. And it's interesting too, because I had a conversation with Tony Ann, who's another reviewer on the book, about how um, directive I produced this book. And because I could have said, oh, you could do it like this or you could do it like that, but in the
Mhm.
book, what I've done instead is I said, no, do it exactly like this. Right. And if you decide to go on a different journey, that's up to you. That's completely yours. Because I feel like if I say, oh, you could do it like that, then you'll blame me saying that you could do it like that. Right. And I didn't
Right.
want anybody to come back and be like, oh, it didn't work this way. And I'm like, so like I wanted to present exactly what I knew was going to work. Like this is the thing that I knew that was going to work. And that's why I presented it specifically that way in the book.
I think that works because it proves the theory. So you have this theory, you had this idea, your abstraction for having surfaces, actions, text, and then you've got your controls. That feels like the right depth there. And but there's so many open questions. And so I love the foreground background because I think that really sits well.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I've run into imperfections with that as well. So at a previous company that I was at where I was implementing this, a slider. What's the
Oh
foreground? What's
yeah.
the background? I ran into like this and I was like, wait a minute,
Yeah.
how do we solve for this? And I'm like, okay, is this an expression? Right?
Mm-hmm.
Does this become an expression in your language?
Mm-hmm.
So I like that. I like the structure, and I think that helps sort of communicate shared language. And I feel like, again, that abstraction, everything is a surface, an action, a control, and
Right.
text. Like
Right.
having those as your baseline just makes it easy to reason about,
Bingo.
right? That's it. And so everything else around that, when we talk about density, when we talk about sort of expressions with regards to different modes, that all is a very nice way of encapsulating different sections and different ideas that, properly pull through to every element that's inside of it. Right. And so the first time I tried this with Tailwind, throwing it out there,
Here we go.
I wasn't able to sort of make that fit. But Tailwind 4 gave me sort of those pieces to kind of build that out a
Mhm.
little bit better. It's still not perfect. I like to tinker.
Yeah. No, it's great. You should absolutely tinker. We're definitely going to get to the tailwind part, of course. But the thing that I wanted to call out about that is it's exactly right about trying to simplify this stuff. The way that I think about it was effectively through wireframes. I mean, it's the name of the show. Was effectively saying if I was going to convey this message, to convey this experience in a particular way, what are the pieces that I need to put onto the wireframe that are separate from other things that would be in the experience, right? I need to show that this thing is an action separate from this text that's not interactive, separate from this control, which is a way for a user to put input in, right?
Right.
Those are the foundational pieces that need to be expressed in the wireframe in the experience, and that has nothing really to do with the color, the topography, the density, has nothing to really do with that, because we're getting to the core fundamentals of user experience by describing that stuff as things that are never changing in the experience, right? Text will always be text. The way
Right.
that you actually present that text, that will be fluid, but the text will always be text. So if knowing that information, we can go ahead and assign these semantic, or what I call intents in the book, assign these intents to
Yep.
the text so that those also don't change, but the values can change in some other unit of work, right?
Yep.
So all things that are in the book, of course, but Tailwind is not in the book. So let's talk about a little bit about the Tailwind, because the big thing that I have about Tailwind that makes it so difficult in terms of aligning to not just Misan Mode, but what we do with semantic tokens in general is color.
Mm,
So tell me, color is a big deal when we're talking about design systems and themability and stuff like that. So
right.
what was your approach there?
Yeah. So CSS custom variables. I mean, honestly, at the end of the day, the reason why this works is because Tailwind 4 is baked in with CSS variables or custom properties, right? CSS custom properties. And having, I'm going to give a shout out here to Kevin Muldoon, having like really good scales and weights, right? And so I've worked with him on color scales throughout the years, and I think his maths, if you will, is fantastic. You bake that in first, and then those colors can change depending whether, again, it's a different mode or a different expression. So give me an example of what you mean by not being able to solve in Tailwind with color.
Okay. So the way that I want to explain this part is specifically in the naming of stuff. It's not the
Okay.
values, right? I tell people, and in fact, I have a blog post that says colors don't solve problems, because I do in that blog post say that many of the exercises in us redoing a design system always starts with like, oh, let's redo the color ramp, and I'm just like, that's not okay. Fine, have a good time, I guess. That's not really solving any problems. It's just a fun thing to do, I guess. So that's like a hot take from a long time ago. The thing that I'm questioning here is that the in Tailwind, color is notoriously um, identified as like color red 500 or
Mm-hmm.
color BG primary or all of these names that don't bode well to
Right.
supporting something like light or dark or even further when it comes to Misan Mode, right? Because Misan Mode is talking about all these different expressions that
Sure.
can come in. So sure, custom properties absolutely allows you to switch things in and out, like I explain also in
Yeah.
the approach. But because Tailwind has been such a class name, utility class name focused um, exercise, what are your class names for that? Are
Yeah.
you aligning to Tailwind at all in terms of its expectations, or are you breaking out of those norms?
So there's a scale, right? And I mean, it depends on where you are. So it's your organization is going to have decisions that are already made, and you might have to bake into what those are. If you're doing this in like proper Meson mode, you're going to have, say you've got a button, and that's type secondary is your class. BG action primary is your class. Text action primary FG is your foreground, right? So you can start with, which I do, you can start with the scales, which is the numbers that you have to work with, and then build that level of abstraction on top of that, which again, I'm with you. I think, having the numbers don't make any sense. You're not able to reason about that. So having your surface have a variable that applies to your neutral 100, for instance, gives it meaning, gives it purpose, right? And then you just use, data attributes, and you can use data attributes to encapsulate similarly to how you would in regular HTML and CSS, and then override those with CSS custom variables, right? So you still have that CSS below there. You're just using Tailwind for the class-based pieces of things. That
Okay.
makes sense?
Okay, so you're really harnessing the I guess the utility of Tailwind as opposed to
Correct.
the class names that it would provide out of the box, because the class
Correct.
names it provides out of the box are shit. Right? Like I do not approve
Well, they're
specifically with color. Sorry, specifically with color. Okay, because
they're difficult to reason about. They're difficult to
I
reason
get
about.
make that's helpful, absolutely. But specifically for color, I don't. If for teams that are using Tailwind, because I've turned around on Tailwind, admittedly. I mean, there's actually it's funny. I went on another podcast for Code and Pixels, and for whatever reason, the SEO on that show is excellent because all it is a big screenshot of me saying I don't like Tailwind when you search for my name on Google, which is great. Um, but it's funny because I've since turned around a little bit in terms of the utility of Tailwind and understanding its place in the ecosystem. But when it comes to the out of the box color class names,
Mhm.
I'm like, these are the worst named colors to put directly into your application, right? What you need to do, in my opinion, is change them to an intent-based class that
Hmm.
then, can reference a, number somewhere or a scale somewhere that then allows you to do, surface background, as
Hmm.
a class
Hmm.
name. And
Right.
then under the hood, whatever surface background is, sometimes that's a light color, sometimes it's a dark color, sometimes it's purple, like, whatever you need it to be. But those decisions of it being light or dark or purple aren't up to the person who's putting the class name on the component.
Hmm.
Separate unit, separate
Concerns.
concern, right? So that's the thing that I criticize in Tailwind at this point now, right? The actual implementation or behavior of a person working with Tailwind, less so. I get it, but the actual decisions of some of the work that a person does, that's where I think you need to have some improvements, which it sounds like you've done.
Yeah, and I mean, it's not perfect, but I'll give you another example. Density is a great one, right?
Mm,
So the concept you have of density where you're scoping an entire section and everything inside of that section has and sort of bakes in the right this spacing and sizing. Those again are just CSS variables,
yes,
and they are CSS variables in Tailwind. So you
yes,
can use the existing classes, you can rename them so that they're more specific, but you're just changing, you're just adding a data attribute on your containing section, your container, and everything inside of there just happens to use those updated spacing variables, right?
right,
And so I'm with you. I think the foundational tokens are not something you can reason about easily, and the abstractions are what help you sort of understand or make things reasonable. And I'm with you. You can do that in Tailwind, and I'm with you that old Tailwind, it was not very easy to do with.
right, exactly. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, we've come a long way when it comes to the Tailwind stuff. And I think that what's interesting too is I think the Tailwind team has recognized that too. I mean, I
Sure.
think you've known that Tailwind is very heavily JavaScript focused for a long time, and now V4, the config is largely just CSS, right? It
Yeah.
comes all the way back to, oh, maybe we should be doing this in CSS, and aligning some people there. But it's the impact is significant, that it's done. And exactly what you're saying, Frank, and explain to the folks here in the audience about, Misan Mode is really just an approach. How you implement the approach is up to you effectively. I don't say this in the book, and I have, recommendations on directions you could take, but I wanted the book to be evergreen, or in terms of me explaining this, so that you don't necessarily need anything to direct this in any particular way. I don't know if Tailwind's going to be around for the next 10, 20 years, right? But at least the book, I think one of the approaches will potentially exist for a long time.
I agree. And let me
Yeah.
just add to that. They're beautiful abstractions that you've
Oh my
created
goodness.
in the sense of they're simple.
He's so good to me.
Well, I'm being realistic
Thank
here.
you.
Like thinking about the AI slop that comes out of, these models these days, Claude Code has its own baked in simplify command because it knows like it needs that kind of help. What you've been able to do is kind of reduce things down to their essence and codified it in a way that just makes it so simple. And that is perfect for what most people need. If they want to build larger abstractions out of it, let them do it. So I'm with you on that. And I think the book is brilliant. Like I had that sort of cross feeling where I was like, oh, are you really going to tell people how to do it? And then I was like, well, yeah, of course he is, because he's doing it in a way that's going to outlast probably any of the technology stacks that we bake on top of web apps these days.
Yeah. Thank you. By the way, I did not pay Frank at all. Okay. In fact, I told him, I said, I'll give you a discount off the book. He says, no, I'm going to pay full price for the book because I support my friends. I was like, this is great.
That's right.
So
support your friends, pay full,
yeah.
Ask for discounts for other people, not your friends.
So I mean, again, I did not pay Frank to say this, but I think, I really value his understanding of this, of course, and the back and forth that we had even prior to me asking about him reading the book. So like, again, you could understand how deeply he understands, or see
Before
how
you
deeply he
wrote the
understands
book,
this thing.
honestly, I was riddling you with questions because I was like, all right, how's this apply there? How can we do this? How can we do that? And you were such a good sport. So thank you. I mean, just generally speaking, for being somebody who's a voice in the community and available.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. So let's change gears a little bit. Before we change gears, if you haven't figured it out already, this is a great book. Okay, this is a great book. You should potentially, go ahead and buy. Mode.place on the internet. So, yeah, let's change gears a little bit. So Frank actually and I were discussing when he signed up to be on the show. By the way, you could also sign up to be on the show by going to wireframe.ds.house. Fill out the form down here. If there's something that you're interested in that you want to talk about, let's talk about it. If you disagree with the book, oh my God, I would love for you to be on the show. But we were talking about some things that we could also discuss on the show. I didn't want to talk about Misan Mode too much on here. Just read the book. But a couple of the things that came up was one of the first things specifically was Frank working at a startup, and the startup kind of energy or organization is certainly different from more mature organizations that would have established things in place. And when I say things, I am talking about a design system, certainly, but also could be just organizational practices that are in place, right? That we could, find some areas of improvement, especially from system thinkers like ourselves. We are going to find areas of optimization that could be improved. So, Frank, let's go a little bit into this separation of design engineering from the other engineering that's at your startup.
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, we have traditional software engineers where I am currently. And because it's a startup, because we're moving fast, we were running very lean. And running lean means getting individuals who have maybe some design and some engineering chops. And we have a title called UI engineer. I sort of think of the canonical sort of name for this is design engineers that have that ability to step from product design into front end and sort of understand workflow design, generally speaking. It's interesting because in the world we live in today, I think it was Mark Andreessen has said that there's kind of like a Mexican standoff between designers, engineers, and product managers. But he also said that exists in Hollywood right now. So writers and actors and directors have that same sort of trifecta of I can do each other's jobs.
Fascinating, yeah.
Yeah. So it's kind of like, all right, well, we live in this new world and we want to run fast. Can we hire engineers? So maybe product designers who also have done front-end code before and can step into that role and help us accelerate in a way that's not just creating sort of, misdirection, because if you just direct these models to build front ends, they kind of come up with things that don't have any rhyme or reason.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So what from that world, have you worked with UI engineers before? You're kind of a UI engineer. Are you doing design, product design and engineering too? How does it look like for you?
Oh my goodness gracious. Yeah. It looks like a lot. So I've been in a full gamut of roles when we talk about these kinds of things. First, I think of when I was at a startup as well, where we had business cards, and on the business card you could put whatever title you want. So I put on lead UI designer and front end engineer, and that was specifically because when I was hired specifically as a front end engineer, but they had no designer, but I had design chops. Okay, I've been doing web design for a really long time. Didn't really realize that I didn't really do product design necessarily. I kind of figured that out on the fly. But I titled my because there was no designer there. Actually, the PM was sending balsamics overseas to just try to make things happen. And when I got on the scene, I would just throw a code pen together and be like, "Oh, okay, yeah, let's go with that," And I was effectively designing the app on the fly. So that's kind of my first foray into the hybrid role without realizing that it was a real role that was gonna come out.
And that was at a startup.
Yeah, this is a startup, right? So now from there, I went to Compass, and that's was also a startup, but more established, real company. I mean, I was probably one of the first 100 engineers there. And when I first started over there, I was on a product team. And I felt so out of place because I was originally in control of the entire experience, right? I had foresight over the entire thing. It was me. Now I'm in this small little piece in this larger ecosystem, and even smaller too, because I'm a small piece in a small feature, right? That's in in sister features that are across the board. And as I'm there looking at all the features, I'm like, why are all these different? You know,
Mm.
why is there no unifying like vision? I would expect that to be the thing that happens here. So I ended up kind of infiltrating into the design org, mostly because of my imposter syndrome, being like, okay, these engineers are like really good. I was just faking it for a long time. Meanwhile, I ended up finding out I was actually very good, but it was like imposter syndrome, whatever. But yeah, from there I became their first UX engineer, using like Rex from Microsoft at the time to figure out what the hell that actually was,
Mm.
and eventually made an entire design system team with UX engineers and designers and a content writer, all of that stuff together. So we figured out processes from there, and that kind of stuff. Now where I am, I'm strictly in the engineering org. And
Okay.
the thing is that it's very challenging because I am not the same engineer as the rest of the org. And it's a much larger organization, right? So the 30-year-old tech company has been around for a long time. So engineers have a preconceived notion about what they're able to do. And I was, I'll tell you what, I was, what's it called? Uh, oh God, I'm missing the word for it. Uh, Basically, I didn't realize how good I had it at Compass because I hired all the front end engineers, so they were all very good. And I was like, oh, this is how front end engineers are hired. They're always very good. And I come over to the new place, and they didn't do any real front end engineering hiring, right? No tests
Mm.
on CSS, none of that, and you could tell, unfortunately. So that's like the full gamut of the experience, right? You go from the small thing where you can move fast, break things, make some changes, make some real big impact, but then you go all the way up to to a larger organization, more impactful organization, and you can get lost in it all and make some difficult, decisions about, okay, well, where do I actually have impact in this large behemoth? So I think where you're sitting right now is huge for making impacts and changes from whatever role, whatever you're sitting in design or engineering, right?
Yeah, the ability to sort of shape this company. I think I was employee 33, right? At sort of a really young age. We just, I think, passed 100 employees. So
There you go.
having my hands in the mold is something I've always loved because I have sort of entrepreneurial roots. Like I really just enjoy making that happen. And I'm curious to see how things go. So
Yeah.
for instance, my role and our team's role has been sort of torn on direction. And I'm writing about this because I actually just did a sort of a talk internally about it too. This idea of like um, having a consulting model. And I'm not the first to say this, but if you think about design system teams, they also sort of do some consulting as well, right? I've ran so many design system office hours where anybody could join from anywhere in the organization and ask questions. That feels very similar to where I am right now because the engineering team is no longer blocked,
Yep.
right? They can create a design doc and get approval on that and just sort of fly and build out this functionality. And sort of the way I've been looking at it is like, all right, rough out a piece of the marble, take a crack at this marble. And when you've got it shaped out just enough the functionality is working, then have design engineering come in, have UI engineering come in, and we will take out our finer tools, our finer marble tools, and really kind of shape that experience a little bit better. What's nice about that sort of method of thinking about how to do work is you don't need to go super deep because they're only working on a piece of functionality. Say they've got like a spreadsheet and they've got an entire a set of rows of things that they have to do to get a whole feature built out. Just a slice, one slice at a time. It allows us to kind of dip in and dip out. The other way to think about that, and the other way we are thinking about that, is having pods,
Mhm.
probably something like 3 to 5 people, 5 max, where they're just going deep on a particular feature. And that way you've got that sort of daily cadence of everybody working together, and you can kind of get deeper into the domain knowledge, get deeper into where this world is going, because especially where I am in cybersecurity, it's just a really fast changing world. It's a fast paced changing world right now, for
Yeah.
good and for worse.
Yeah. Goodness gracious. So now, when it comes to the process, you're talking about the slices of this stuff, right? You're saying, okay, we're gonna bite off a little bit of this, a little bit of this, instead of this massive undertaking, right? Because this is what we see very often is like, okay, there's this new feature, we gotta all hands on deck, except it's not really all hands on deck. It's choice people and stakeholders that are on deck, and some important people are left out. Like I'll say this, speaking on behalf of some of the content writers and strategists that I saw at a meetup last week here in New York, where I was speaking to them about, features that come out and people moving fast, and all you see is poor copy and even potentially lorem ipsum in some of this stuff where they didn't introduce these experts at the top of the funnel for these large things. But meanwhile, there's also this thing about saying, okay, well, if we're going to do this small slice, how many cooks do we need in that small slice? There's this balance. And granted, like, I can imagine a startup doesn't necessarily have a content writer, right? So like that's a very, very niche thing, and you'll have larger organizations that do. But there's a certain interesting balance. It's almost like, when do you stop becoming a startup and when do you become a larger organization? Like, at what point does that actually happen? Do you think you have any ideas of how that works out with that balance?
I mean, it does slowly kind of work its way out, right? So the engineering team is growing fast, and the few UI engineers that we have right now aren't able to sort of keep up with triaging everything that's coming our way, because it is a lot, and they are moving very fast. But to your point, we have good branding. And by that, I mean, we sort of know what our voice should be to our external facing customers and our internal teams. So our application mostly serves us internally, but also has external consumers as well that are the same persona, if you will. There will be a time where we'll need to do internationalization. There will be a time where we need to flesh this out better, or sort of, or more. And how we do that is with these roles, right? So there will be individuals that are in these roles. Now, I have a weird take on this. Like I said earlier, I think I've mentioned this earlier. It's like, I've always thought about how I'm going to automate myself out of a job.
Yeah.
So when I think about, like, the conversation about taste and how, these models don't really have it, and it's because they're trained on all of design throughout all of the internet. And when you sort of have all of that, you have this bland general sort of aspect of what you sort of put out there. In 6 months, that might not be true, right? Models may get to a point where they have good taste, and then what? Right. So you've been thinking about this, right? I've been hearing you talk about the sort of shift in this, and I'm thinking about it too. I'm like, well, how can I build design system-esque content that affords me the ability to offload the work that I'm seeing over and over again that's not good coming out of these models? For instance, iconography for illustrative purposes, or decoration that doesn't actually serve or earn its place there. How do I encode that judgment in a way that the models will adhere to? And that's design systems. So my brain used to sort of have like an argument in its head of like when an organization is ready for a design system, for instance. And that feels like it's kind of melting away a little bit, because we want to move fast, but we also want to keep that high fidelity. So my brain is working with the other amazing brains at my teams to think of ways to constrain these models in ways that give them the right context without bloating their context, to shape things the way they need to. And that could be with design. It could be with content.
Yeah. So clearly we're doing a little bit of a move over here to the AI space, and this is another topic that we were potentially discussing, because yes, I am very interested in this model behavior thing. It was the last episode that I did here solo, and a couple of things that I wanted to share with you is let me a second here. You're gonna pop up. One of the things that I was a part of last week was the question with Ben Callahan. And he had co-host Davey, who's currently at Atlassian, as a designer over there in the design systems team. And the whole topic was all about using AI and automation for design systems. And I thought it was very topical because the design system report from Zero Height came out, and there was a little group of us that had a preview of it. And we were all fairly shocked that people were saying that much of their job wasn't being automated, but the design system teams are diminishing. So you would imagine that it would make more sense, because the teams are diminishing, that more things are being automated, but it wasn't the case, according to the report.
Hmm.
So I was very interested to see what was going on in this particular session of the question. And a lot of discussions in there. In fact, if you're interested in one of the things that came out of that, Kalig will be on the show on Thursday to talk about his approach to basically taking a one-line prompt, more or less, and getting a high-quality component out of it. It's a really incredible read if you haven't read it already, but we're going to be talking about it on the show. Um, but one of the things that has bothered me is this whole thing about skills, right? The whole world is talking about skills. And the thing that's bothering me about skills in particular is that they just only exist locally on a person's machine,
Mm.
right? So if you make a change to the system or to the guidance or anything like that, that person needs to actively know that the change has occurred, actively pull down the new skill, and then start using it. And I always thought that was like backwards from what we're trying to get to from a design system angle, right? From a
Mm.
design system angle, we want your guidance to be in where you're working at all times. We want the latest and greatest. Sure, if you're, the design system's got something in beta, we don't send that out as, as a thing. But for the guidance that's out there, right? I've been working particularly on, before AI, I was like, oh, we got to put the documentations in Figma, right? So oh God, I forgot the name of the project, but there was a project that effectively put your documentation inside of Figma so you could have the component and documentation right next to each other in Figma. And I thought that was huge because now a person didn't have to leave their workspace to find the docs on this website with different IA, whatever. But now all that is out the window. Now we can completely expose what the guidance is right in that chat window, right in that working space, wherever
Mhm.
that thing is, and have it in a language and a mindset that user is working on. So, how are you using AI in any way on your side in your startup now?
Oh yeah, we are
Yeah.
super AI accelerated. I'm blessed in that we have the ability to work with all three of the major foundries right now. So we've got, Google, Anthropic, and OpenAI. We're mostly focused on Claude Code. Skills are an interesting topic, though. I'm kind of curious, like, why not have a component library that has on install a script that runs that copies your skills to your project specifically or to your root so that it's inherited. So skills inherit from like their parent folders. And if it's in your user folder, for instance, and any project that's living in your user folder that inherits that skill, it feels like there's leverage there. That's the word I usually use, is like, how do you create leverage with the skills? But the other thing that's interesting about skills is, like, I think Vercel did research or evals on skills and said they only kind of show up 60% of the time
Mm,
unless you call them. So it's like, well, that's not great. Like,
right.
I want these models before they start building something to know what tools they have. And so I was just talking to my coworker, Jeff, and we were thinking about ways of writing scripts that sort of handle this
Mm,
for us, right? The ability for a script to be run to look at the component library and go through maybe a suite of references in a skill on what pieces exist and how to use them. So they're not adding superfluous classes to
hmm.
all of our components, making things look weird that are supposed to just be standard. Let
Yeah.
me pause there for a second because there's just so much in that.
No, there's a ton in that for sure. So the answer that I got in the skills discussion in there, because again, a lot of a lot of the discord out there is skills. Oh, skill for this, skill for that. This skill's amazing, whatever. But the discussion or the answer I got out of that was actually from Kalig, which was that you would have a another skill that periodically updates skills. It goes out and says, "Hey, is there an update to this skill? Okay, bring it back down." Right? And I was like, "Oh, okay, that's interesting." But the the response that I have to that still is that it could be out of date. It could be, in some way like, there's opportunities, and I didn't know the metric of 60% not, being used, not being used. I was like, "Oh, okay, that's significant." Now, my answer to all of that has always been MCP, hosted MCP, right? So you put the MCP on, a server, you connect to it once, and then all of those things, as long as it knows to reference that MCP when you're working will get latest because it's going to go ahead and fetch information, either resources, tools, whatever, and bring that back down, right? So that in and of itself will always be up to date. So when you're talking about, onboarding a particular person into the system or something like that, because again, I'm thinking about traditionally, we've had, at least in my practice, difficulty getting these folks that are onboarding or even people who've been here for a while to see the documentation, to understand what the updates are, what's relevant to them, and if it does update, when do you know? Do you read release notes? Nobody reads release notes. They're just the CYA for us, right? So that's the hard thing here is just like, we're doing all this stuff, we're putting out all this documentation, and maybe it's too much, right? Maybe there's too much information. How could I possibly look at it all? When now, instead of putting this all on this website, now we're just going to go ahead and prepare this MCP such that you connect to it once and you get it forever, right? Forever, whatever the heck that means, right? That's why I'm looking at this skills stuff going, I feel like this is overcomplicating. I feel like MCP solved it. I can understand like skills for personal projects, right? You got a personal project you're working on, you want your specific setup for that particular project, or for your machine, right? Your machine, you got, one way that you set up all your personal projects, no problem. But on the same token, now with like Claude Code and being able to, code stuff on the go, like I'll go on a train and I'll have an idea and want to code something. Well, the skills that are on my machine are not in the cloud environment, right? Unless it's part of the project, right? And if it's part of the project and it references something that's on my machine, lost, right? So there's so many points of failure with skills that I'm seeing that, again, I don't have any particular clear answers to, that I feel like MCP just solves just because it's hosted. I mean, you have local ones too, but, are you solving any of those problems now?
Yeah, I think you're onto something there with MCP servers. Traditionally, I haven't been a fan of them only because, again, AI models have been trained on everything that's existed before, and CLI tools have just been absolutely enough. So anything that exists in a CLI tool, these model harnesses have the ability to use Bash and can use your CLI, and then also changed your context window. So I think this is maybe out of beta now, but there was a beta feature in Claude Code that didn't pull the entire MCP server context in. Instead, looked at the tools, listed them out, and just grabbed pieces of them.
Right.
Because I remember early on, maybe like November or just before November, before Opus 4.5 and ChatGPT 5.4, 5.2, whatever came out that time period, you'd get a lot of bloat from using Chrome's MCP dev tools. And I remember thinking to myself, like, the frustrating parts about working with AI is that the engineers can run a mile a minute, but designers, it's just everything's so much slower, right? If you don't have that full validation loop, right? If you don't have test suites that have to pass so that AI kind of does its thing, or React compiler so that your compiled code doesn't break, what is good? And so you don't have like a good understanding of this. And so like asking it to use Chrome MCP dev server tools to like go into your browser and like check to make sure things were working would completely blow out your context, and you just get compaction left and right. So I think MCP servers are the right direction for what you're saying, and that does make sense. I am a bigger fan of CLI tools, generally speaking. I think skills need to be, if they're going to exist, it would need to be something that, like you said, updates frequently and can be that canonical information. You know what you're reminding me of? I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but like in the early days of design systems, there was an individual who worked at, I think it was Lonely Planet. And the way he had built this system was API driven. So every time, this was probably cached better than I'm explaining it, but every time somebody would go to a Lonely Planet property, the API calls would go to a design system and paint the page with the latest components. So talk about being like immediate, right? You would make a change and nothing needed to rebuild itself because the page itself would actually call your API and pull back the components that were the latest. And I remember reaching out to this individual, I can't remember his name, and the answer was kind of just how we're using dependencies in NPM today as the solution. I was like, but we still have that lag, right? It's
Yeah.
like, what version are you on? As
Yeah.
opposed to an MCP server, where, like you said, it can always be up to date.
Yeah. No, I really resonate with, and I have a feeling I know who you're talking about. It's also missing from my brain, but I'll have to look it up. But I also went in that journey just before leaving Compass, was this whole keeping components up to date kind of thing, because that was a problem that we've always had. It's like, okay, we make a component update. How are the downstream teams going to know about that update? And then the migration path is always a headache, right? Because sometimes you need to change the API, and now they have to go ahead and, assign that unit of work, and it's going to be some migration situation. And eventually we had code mods. Now
Yep.
migrations are easy, right?
Yeah.
Now there's just like, oh, AI migrate, thank you. But back then, having that component and trying to figure out, okay, how do we make it so that we can put in new components on the fly? That was like holy grail back then. About how do you really update this UI? And we're not talking necessarily theming, right? Because theming we've effectively solved by the book. But functionality, right? And adding functions or presentation, the way that we lay out pieces on this UI, maybe there's a new side panel or a new way of listing components. Maybe it's not a card layout, now it's a table layout. Like all of those functionalities that we want to potentially introduce at with little friction from the actual application owners, right? What does that even look like? And I think that's something that has honestly never been solved properly. And maybe again, the Lonely Planet thing is probably a good exploration in it. But again, I think now, because it's so fast to just generate another version, I'm not sure if we even need to solve it anymore,
Oh man, you're knocking on the door of like some things that I've been thinking about lately too, which is like, is it possible that I could just give like very foundational constraints to AI and let it build what it needs to build? And if it needs to be a unique component, sure, we want that systematic sort of look and that cohesive product. But if it's something new that somebody's creating, an engineer's creating, like something new that's specific for a feature, it may not even fit into the design system itself. How do we give the AI the tools to be able to do that correctly, and to do that in a way that gets us 90% of the way there instead of like 60% of the way there at best, which is what I feel like we get now.
Yeah, I think you're right. And again, I think it, so topical. I think that's what we're going to be talking about on Thursday.
Oh yeah, okay.
Have you read the piece by Kalig yet?
Everybody you've mentioned here, from Tony Ann to Ben, I love. Okay, like I love all these people,
Yeah.
but no, I haven't had a chance to read that yet. No.
So yeah, we're absolutely going to, of course, link it on the bottom of the show for Thursday. But I'll link it for you directly after the show. But
Appreciate
absolutely, I read a good part of it because it's an hour-long read. It's a serious sit down and have a cup of coffee or whatever, an adult beverage, and sit down and read this thing. And this is very specifically targeted to design system nerds like us, who have been struggling for years on trying to get quality of our components to our teams as quickly as possible, right? Because that's always been a bottleneck, right? And we talked about this, I think you commented actually, we were talking about this discussion about how fast some of these engineering teams are moving, and the design system team always having such a hard time keeping up with those changes, where we've been always in the dust. We're like, okay, we finally made the thing that you were asked for, and then the team's like, no, we moved on for that. Like, we got a new thing that we're working on, blah, 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 blah. We already made it, whatever. We don't need that anymore, right? So, trying to get the best quality as fast as possible is the new thing that I think AI is unlocking, and we need to, I think, really learn and grow out of what I think Kalig has started there in terms of this exploration he's done, and really take it to a next level. So I'm definitely looking forward to your thoughts when you get an opportunity to read that thing.
I can't wait to read that. That's super exciting. But I do wonder if, like, why not just have the design systems team consult with that team to help them build the component that they need? And again, at that point, you could figure out, is this a good fit for the design system? Would this be a good fit for consuming into the design system because we believe that the larger organization would benefit from this? So yeah, part of me is like, I get where you're coming from with regards to design systems built a thing and now they've moved on. They're 5 sprints past that or whatever it is.
Hmm.
But we live in a world where if engineering teams are going to be building really fast, let's be consultants. Let's sit with them while they're baking this thing out and help them sort of shape it with the constraints that we know exist today, like Misan Mode, right? Like having those pieces at their disposal and aligning things correctly to make sure that it sort of dots all the I's and crosses all the T's. And then they're in a good place and you can move on. I get that it's a complete mind shift, but why not that?
I think the answer to the why not that is that it ends up being like a perfect world. I say that specifically because
Oh
the
no.
way that I thinking about this, unfortunately, is that the reality. I think what you're saying makes a lot of sense. You know, feature team says, "Hey, we need to build a timeline component, right? And we want to do it the right way. So, design system team, design engineering team, please help us out by telling us, you know, or working with us to make the best component we possibly can, right? And that's what I think we all want, especially from our expertise, where we're going to, you know, have the details that feature teams typically are missing. The accessibility spots, right? The performance spots, the other usability considerations that they're not thinking about because they're thinking about the feature. And that's exactly where it breaks down. Because I think what happens very often is that the feature teams are so focused on the feature and getting the feature out and over the line and pressured by some arbitrary deadline that as soon as we say, oh, well, we need to do some research on the accessibility of a timeline. We got to research timelines. We got to figure, no, I know what a timeline is. I'm just going to build it, right? That's what we see all the time. We're just going to build it. The timeline will be out, right? And
Well,
then,
wait. The question is like,
ahead.
is there like a product spec? Is there something that's been written about the timeline thing? Because if there is, then they could send that to the design system team who can work sort of like on that accessibility question that you're talking about while they're building out that functionality, which will like take them an hour, right? Like, my God, these days. But like, that's my question is like, can we get to a place where the timeline component was part of a feature that was written somewhere, right? Somebody talked about it somewhere. I don't know if you have a product team, but usually like a product manager might sort of build this out first. Well, if that's the case, or even an engineer, like that would be the time to introduce that to the design systems team and have somebody specifically assigned to that and think about that a little bit more so that you can catch up with them, because you're right, they're moving so fast.
I don't think there's a spec. I think there's a product manager that wrote, you know, or drew out a timeline and was like, this would be cool on my product. Let's put it in, right? And then you have Cursor whip that thing up from Tailwind and it winds up in the product. And this is stuff that's happening right now, right? This is the reality. And I completely aligned with the idea of the best case scenario. We're going to write all the specs. We're going to do it the right way, et cetera, et cetera. I think that is the right way of doing it. But I had this conversation with Carl Koch a couple of months ago now, about done versus perfect, where we used to have this problem about saying, okay, done is better than perfect. But now done can happen so much faster that you would imagine we now have time for perfect, right? Where we can go ahead and make the thing perfect by going and putting the accessibility and stuff like that. It's not the case. What we're doing, and at least what I'm seeing, is that we're doing done lots of times. We're doing done, and then we're done again, and then we're done again, and we're done again, because we threw out the last done. We threw out the dones 2 times before. We never actually even consider perfect. And that's what we're seeing now because of all the throwaway that's available for all the churn. We're missing all of the perfect that I'm seeing.
I think that's temporary, though. If you talk to your engineers, I think they would even agree that we're making decisions that are going to be very difficult to undo in the future, right? And so there is going to be a time period where I think pendulum swing is another article I can't wait to write. Pendulum swing. So the pendulum has swung in the direction of done, 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 done. There's no sign of perfect. I think it's going to swing back a little bit more towards perfect, where we have more of a balance. But you're getting to something that's going to hit people pretty hard if they're doing done, 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 and they're not having accessible components, and then they got a lawsuit on their hands.
Yeah, and that's what we usually, harp on, that okay, they're going to respond when the lawsuit comes. I mean, has that happened? I mean, somewhat,
I know it has, but
so,
not everywhere, to your
right. Yeah,
point.
I mean, that's the thing, is it's like I remember specifically at Compass, I was put on a team with legal to try to get compliant with accessibility, right? Uh, and it's happening, and there's initiatives out there to try to get there. But I've
Mhm.
found in my experience, also my place that I'm at now, we do that initiative, and then it kind of fizzles out. It's like, oh, well, we have a new product that's out here. It's not applicable to that old edict that we had before. Totally separate thing. There's always, like, excuses out there, and that's what the unfortunate thing that I'm seeing. But I think, again, I think in a perfect world, we would have the ability to do more perfect. And again, I'm gonna plug the thing for Thursday. I think it's available, right? I think what Kaylee put out there, and I'm really excited for Thursday about talking about exactly what these questions are, right? How do we actually make this component as fast as possible with the highest quality, so that no one can complain that we didn't rise to the occasion, like we have, unfortunately, potentially had complaints about us before, you know?
Love it. Yeah, I think there's no perfect world, like you had mentioned before. It's, do you have teams that care?
Bingo.
Unfortunately for me, I am working with a team that cares, and so there is a time period where that pendulum will swing back, and it's already swinging back, and that's what I care about. It's like, okay, do the done done done, see how that works out, be on that bleeding edge, but then let's bring it back to reality, and all of that speed that you've gained, use that to slow down. That's all I'm saying.
Killer. What a great end to it right there. That was lovely. Uh, Go ahead, Frank. Plug what you got going on with you out there, your website, where people could find you, all the good stuff that you got going on. You mentioned some writings that you want to do. What's going on?
Yeah, I mean, I'll make it real simple. You can find me on X. Frank Stallone is my first name, last name. I've given up on handles on the internet these days. Yeah, I'll be doing more writing about sort of how we've been on the bleeding edge with regards to AI accelerated development and design at the startup that I'm at on my website, but you can get that through my X that way. But yeah, looking forward to sharing sort of insights with regards to taste, craft, and creating leverage in different ways.
Hell yeah. Well, that was super good. And this was such a great conversation. Thank you so much for being on the show. This was really a jam for me. But and that's our show. Thank you so much for watching. Before you go, please help out the show by smashing that like and subscribe button to, of course, get notified the next time that we go live. And feel free to continue this conversation on the official Design Systems Discord at discord.ds.house. Play nice in those comments. I'll see you on the internet. Bye.